I walked into the bank to deposit money into my account, a routine errand I'd done 100 times before. But within minutes, I felt like an outsider in my own country. The cashier's eyes narrowed with every word I spoke, her smirk slicing through my accent like it was proof I didn't belong. Customers ahead of me got quick smiles and polite nods, but I was met with suspicion, like I was trying to pull something over. It wasn't just paperwork holding things up. It was humiliation dressed in policy and fake courtesy. I couldn't stay silent. That choice, right there in that cold, sterile bank, changed everything. What happened next? My name is Daniel Okoye, and I came to the United States 10 years ago with a degree in finance from a respected university in Lagos. Back home, I was someone, a junior manager at a growing firm, respected, with a clear path forward. But when I landed in Chicago, that all vanished. The job market didn't care about my credentials. My accent, thick and unmistakable, seemed to erase my resume before anyone read it. I took a job as a night shift supervisor at a warehouse, a far cry from the corner office I'd once dreamed of. It paid the bills, kept my wife, Amara, and our 2 kids fed, but every shift chipped away at the man I knew I could be. Life in America wasn't what I'd expected. I'd prepared for hard work, but not for the small, stinging moments that came with it. At the grocery store, cashiers would repeat, "What?" 3 times when I asked for a bag, their impatience louder than my words. Neighbors would smile tightly when I introduced myself, their eyes lingering on my name like it was a puzzle they didn't want to solve. Okoye. That's different, they'd say, as if I needed reminding. At work, colleagues would mimic my accent during lunch breaks, laughing it off as a joke. "Lighten up, Dan," they'd say when I didn't laugh back. I'd nod, swallow the knot in my throat, and keep moving. I had to. My family was counting on me. But those moments piled up. Every mispronounced name, every raised eyebrow when I spoke, every assumption I was less capable because English wasn't my first language, it wore me down. I'd spent years studying, earning honors, proving myself in rooms where no one looked like me. Yet here, I was just the guy with the funny accent, the one who didn't quite fit. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself to keep my head down, work hard, and prove them wrong through results. My degree hung on the wall of our small apartment, a reminder of who I was, even if no one else saw it. Still, I dreamed of more. I wanted my kids to see their father as someone who didn't just survive, but thrived. I wanted Amara to look at me the way she did back in Lagos, when we'd talk about building a future together. So, I kept studying at night, taking online courses to stay sharp, hoping one day I'd land a job that matched my skills. I applied for positions at banks, consultancies, anywhere I could use my degree. Most never called back. The ones that did would hesitate when we met, their smiles fading as soon as I opened my mouth. "We'll be in touch," they'd say, but they never were. The worst part wasn't the rejections. It was the silence inside me. I'd stopped speaking up, stopped correcting people when they butchered my name or assumed I was uneducated. I told myself it was easier that way, that arguing would only make things worse. But deep down, I knew I was letting pieces of myself slip away. I wasn't just adapting to America, I was shrinking to fit it. That quiet resentment burned, but I buried it, until that day in the bank when everything I'd held back came rushing to the surface. It was a gray Tuesday morning in Chicago, the kind where the wind cuts through your jacket no matter how tightly you zip it up. I'd taken a half-day off from the warehouse to handle something straightforward, depositing a few $100s into my savings account. The money was from extra shifts I'd picked up, a small step toward a better future for Amara and the kids. I walked into the First National Bank branch on Clark Street, a place I'd been to dozens of times. The lobby was all polished marble and muted lights with a line of customers waiting at the counter. I joined the queue, clutching the deposit slip I'd filled out at home, expecting a quick in and out. The line moved steadily until it was my turn. I stepped up to the counter where a woman in her 40s with a tight bun and a name tag reading Karen Mitchell sat behind the glass. She didn't look up as I slid my deposit slip and ID under the partition. "Good morning," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'd like to deposit this into my savings account. Her eyes flicked to my ID, then to me, lingering a second too long. Okoye, she read aloud, pronouncing it like it was a word she'd never seen before. That's an interesting name. Where's it from? I forced a polite smile. It's Nigerian. I've had the account here for years. I'd learned to keep my answers short, to avoid the follow-up questions that always felt like traps. But Karen leaned back in her chair, her pen tapping against the counter. Nigeria, huh? So, you're not from around here, are you? Her tone wasn't curious. It was sharp, like she was sizing me up. I nodded, feeling the eyes of the man behind me in line. I've lived in Chicago for 10 years, I said, hoping to move things along. She didn't touch the deposit slip. Instead, she tilted her head, her lips curling into a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. 10 years, and you still sound like you just got here, she said, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. A woman in a red coat glanced over, then looked away. My stomach tightened, but I kept my face neutral. Can you process the deposit, please? I asked, my voice steady despite the heat rising in my chest. Karen picked up my ID, holding it up to the light like she was checking for a forgery. I just need to make sure everything matches, she said, her words slow and deliberate. We have to be careful, you know. Lots of people try things. The implication hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. I felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the lobby, some curious, some uncomfortable, none willing to meet mine. The man behind me shifted his weight, clearing his throat. I wanted to disappear, to walk out and pretend this wasn't happening, but I'd come here to do something simple, something I had every right to do. What do you mean, try things? I asked, keeping my tone calm but firm. Karen's eyebrows shot up like she was surprised I'd dared to question her. Oh, you know, people sometimes use accounts that don't belong to them, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. It's just a policy to double-check when something seems off. She emphasized the last word, her eyes locking onto mine. My accent, my name, my presence, everything about me was off to her. I clenched my fists in my pockets, my nails digging into my palms. I'd faced comments like this before, subtle jabs disguised as jokes, questions that weren't really questions. But this was different. This was public, deliberate, and it stung deeper because it was happening in a place where I was supposed to be just another customer. I glanced at the other tellers, hoping someone might step in, but they were busy with their own lines, their heads down. The woman in the red coat was now whispering to the man next to her, their eyes darting toward me. I thought of Amara, waiting at home, trusting me to handle this. I thought of my kids, who deserved a father who didn't let people walk over him. The shame was there, burning in my throat, but so was something else. Anger, raw and unfamiliar. I'd spent years swallowing it, nodding through the slights, convincing myself it was easier to stay quiet. But standing there with Karen's smirk and the weight of the room on me, I realized silence wasn't protecting me. It was letting her win. Miss Mitchell, I said, reading her name tag aloud, my voice louder than I'd intended. I've been a customer here for years. My ID is valid, my account is in order, and I'm just trying to deposit my money. Is there a problem? The words came out steady, but inside my heart was pounding. I wasn't just asking about the deposit, I was challenging her to say what she really meant. Her smile faltered for a split second, and I knew I'd struck a nerve. The man behind me stopped fidgeting. The lobby felt quieter, heavier. Karen straightened, her face hardening. I'm just doing my job, she said, but her tone was colder now, defensive. She finally picked up the deposit slip, but her eyes never left mine, like she was daring me to push further. And in that moment, I knew I would. This wasn't just about a deposit anymore. It was about every time I'd been made to feel small, every time I'd let it slide. I wasn't going to let it slide today. The air in the bank felt heavier now, like the marble walls were closing in. Karen Mitchell leaned forward, her fingers still holding my ID as if it were evidence in a trial. I'm going to need additional verification, she said, her voice loud enough to carry across the lobby. You know, just to be absolutely certain this account belongs to you. She paused, letting the words hang, her lips twitching into that same half-smile that made my skin crawl. I stood frozen at the counter, my deposit slip untouched, the weight of her implication sinking deeper. She wasn't just questioning my paperwork, she was questioning my right to be there at all. I glanced around, hoping for some sign of support, but the other customers avoided my eyes. The woman in the red coat was now staring at her phone, pretending she hadn't heard. The man behind me shifted his weight again, his impatience loud in the silence. I could feel their judgment, or maybe it was just my own shame twisting their glances into something worse. "What kind of verification?" I asked, keeping my voice low, trying to hold on to the calm I'd practiced for years. Inside, though, my pulse was racing and my hands were clammy in my pockets. Karen slid a form across the counter, her movements slow, deliberate. "Fill this out," she said, "and I'll need another form of ID, a passport maybe, or a utility bill in your name. Something to confirm you are who you say you are." Her tone was sharp, each word a jab. I'd brought my driver's license, the same ID I'd used here for years, but now it wasn't enough. "My license is valid," I said, pointing to it. "And my account number is on the deposit slip. You can check it in your system." She didn't even look at the screen. Instead, she leaned back, crossing her arms. "It's policy," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We have to be thorough, especially with certain accounts." She let the word certain linger, her eyes flicking to my name on the ID again. A man in a suit waiting at the next teller glanced over, his eyebrows raised. I felt my face burn, not with anger yet, but with the kind of embarrassment that makes you want to shrink into nothing. I'd been through this before, subtle digs, extra scrutiny, but never so openly, never in front of a room full of strangers. "I've deposited money here before," I said, my voice tighter now. "Same account, same ID. Why is this a problem today?" I hated how my accent thickened when I was upset, how it gave her more ammunition. Karen's smile widened, just enough to notice. "Oh, I'm sure you have," she said, her tone mocking. "But we can't be too careful, can we? You'd be surprised how often people try to use someone else's account." She said it loud enough for the whole line to hear, and I caught a woman in a blue scarf whispering to her husband, their eyes darting toward me. My chest tightened, a mix of rage and helplessness I hadn't felt since my early days in Chicago. I wanted to shout, to tell her I'd earned every dollar in that account, that I wasn't some fraud sneaking into her pristine bank. But I knew how that would look, a black man with an accent raising his voice in a place like this. I'd seen enough news stories to know how fast things could spiral. So I took a breath, forcing my hands to unclench. "Can you please check my account?" I asked, each word measured. "It's all there. Daniel Okoye. Same address, same account number." Karen sighed, like I was wasting her time, and finally typed something into her computer. The seconds dragged, her fingers tapping the keyboard with exaggerated slowness. The lobby was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional cough from the line. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, judging, waiting for me to prove I belonged. She said, squinting at the screen. "It's here, but I'm still going to need that extra ID. You understand, don't you?" She looked at me, her eyes daring me to argue. I didn't have a passport with me. I didn't carry utility bills around. She knew that, or at least she could guess it. This wasn't about policy. It was about power. She wanted me to feel small, to walk away defeated. And for a moment, I almost did. I thought of Amara, waiting at home, of the kids who'd ask why I looked so tired when I got back. I thought of all the times I'd let comments like hers slide, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. But standing there with her smug expression and the weight of the room on me, something shifted. I wasn't going to let her win this time. "Miss Mitchell," I said, my voice steady but louder now, "I'm a customer here, just like everyone else. I have the right to deposit my money without being treated like a criminal." The words came out before I could stop them, and the lobby went quieter still. The man in the suit looked up again, his pen pausing over his own paperwork. Karen's smile vanished, replaced by a hard stare. "I'm just following protocol," she said, her voice icy. But I saw the flicker of unease in her eyes. She hadn't expected me to push back. I stood taller, my hands no longer in my pockets. "Then follow it for everyone," I said. "Not just me." The words felt like a release, like I'd been holding them in for years. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. This wasn't just about a deposit, it was about every time I'd been made to feel less than human, and I was done letting it happen. The silence in the bank lobby was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioner and the occasional shuffle of papers. Karen Mitchell's icy stare bore into me, her fingers still hovering over my ID like she was deciding whether to hand it back or escalate this further. My heart pounded, but I held her gaze, refusing to look away. I'd spent years swallowing slights, nodding through disrespect, convincing myself it was easier to stay quiet. But standing there, with her smug dismissal and the weight of every judging glance in the room, I felt something snap inside me. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not today. "Why, Miss Mitchell," I said, my voice steady but carrying an edge I hadn't let out before. "I've been a customer here for 10 years. I've never had to provide extra ID for a deposit. If this is policy, I'd like to see it in writing." The words came out clearer than I expected, each one a small act of defiance. The man in the suit at the next counter stopped writing, his head turning slightly. The woman in the red coat glanced up from her phone. Karen's face tightened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "It's standard procedure," she said, but her voice wavered just enough to betray her confidence. "A standard for who?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. "Because the people before me didn't need extra forms. They didn't get asked where their names come from." I kept my tone calm, but the accusation was clear. The lobby felt smaller now, the air thick with tension. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it, her eyes flicking to the other tellers. None of them looked up, but I could tell they were listening. I was done playing her game. "I'd like to speak to your manager," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she looked caught off guard. "That's not necessary," she said quickly, reaching for my deposit slip like she could brush this off. "I can handle this if you just provide the documents." But I wasn't backing down. "No," I said, my voice firm. "I want to speak to the manager." Now, the word "now" hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. The man behind me let out a low whistle, and I felt the weight of every stare in the room. I didn't care anymore. This wasn't just about me, it was about every time I'd been made to feel like I didn't belong. Karen hesitated, then stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "Fine," she said, her tone clipped. She disappeared through a door behind the counter, leaving my ID and deposit slip sitting there like evidence of a crime I hadn't committed. I stood rooted to the spot, my hands steady now, though my mind was racing. What if the manager backed her up? What if this turned into something bigger, something I couldn't control? I thought of Amara, of the kids, of the life we'd built here. But I also thought of the years I'd spent shrinking myself to fit into a world that kept pushing me out. I couldn't keep doing that. A woman in her 50s emerged from the back, her name tag reading, "Linda Carter, Branch Manager." She had a practiced smile, the kind that said she'd dealt with complaints before. "How can I help you, sir?" she asked, glancing at my ID on the counter. I took a deep breath, knowing this was my chance. "My name is Daniel Okoye," I said, keeping my voice even. "I came here to deposit money into my account, but your employee has been questioning my identity and my right to be here. She's asked for extra documents no one else had to provide, and she's made comments about my name and my accent in front of other customers." Linda's smile faltered, her eyes flicking to the line of customers watching us. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding," she said, her voice smooth but cautious. "We have strict policies to ensure security." I nodded, expecting that. "I understand," I said. "But I've been a customer here for years, and I've never been treated like this. If it's policy, I'd like to see it. And if it's not, I'd like to know why I'm being singled out." My words were deliberate, each one a step onto ground I'd never dared to tread before. Linda picked up my ID, glancing at it, then at me. "Let's step into my office," she said, gesturing toward a glass-walled room nearby. I followed her, feeling the eyes of the lobby on my back. Inside, she closed the door and sat behind a desk cluttered with papers. "Tell me exactly what happened," she said, her tone neutral but attentive. I recounted everything: Karen's comments about my name, her insinuations about my account, the way she'd spoken loudly enough for everyone to hear. I didn't embellish, didn't raise my voice. I let the facts speak for themselves. Linda listened, nodding occasionally, her face unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back, tapping a pen against her desk. "I'm sorry you felt uncomfortable," she said, and I bristled at the word "felt." It wasn't just a feeling. It was real, deliberate, but I stayed calm. "It's not about feeling uncomfortable," I said. "It's about being treated differently because of who I am. I want to know what you're going to do about it." Her eyebrows raised slightly, like she wasn't used to customers pushing back this far. "I'll look into it," she said, but her tone was too vague, too practiced. I knew that kind of promise. It was the kind that led nowhere. "I'd like to file a formal complaint," I said, my voice steady but unyielding. "And I'd like a copy of your policies on customer verification. If this is standard, I want to understand why it only seems to apply to me." Linda's expression shifted, a flicker of unease crossing her face. She nodded, pulling a form from a drawer. "Of course," she said. "I'll get that started for you." As I filled out the complaint form, my hands shook slightly, not from fear but from the weight of what I was doing. I'd never filed a complaint before, never called out someone's behavior so directly. Back home in Lagos, I'd been taught to respect authority, to keep the peace. But this wasn't about peace anymore. It was about dignity, mine and everyone else's who'd been made to feel small in a place like this. I thought of the other customers who might have faced the same treatment, who might have walked away in silence. I wasn't going to be one of them. When I handed the form back, Linda promised to follow up within a week. I nodded, but I wasn't done. As I left her office, I noticed another teller, a younger man named Javier, watching me from his station. He gave a small nod, like he'd seen what happened and understood. I made a mental note of his name. I'd need allies if this went further, and something told me it would. Walking out of the bank, I felt lighter, not because anything was resolved, but because I'd taken a stand. For the first time in years, I felt like the man I'd been back in Lagos, the one who didn't let the world define him. The week after I filed the complaint felt like walking on a tightrope. Every morning, I woke up wondering if I'd made a mistake, if I'd pushed too hard and invited trouble. Amara noticed the tension in my shoulders, the way I'd stare at my coffee without drinking it. "You did the right thing, Daniel," she said one evening, her hand resting on mine. "You've always been stronger than you think." Her words steadied me, but the uncertainty lingered. I kept replaying the scene in the bank, Karen's smirk, the manager's vague promises, the eyes of strangers judging me. Had I just made myself a target? 2 days later, I got a call from Linda Carter, the branch manager. Her voice was professional, clipped, like she was reading from a script. "Mr. Okoye, we've reviewed your complaint," she said. "Could you come in to discuss it further?" I agreed, but my stomach churned. This could be a brush-off, a way to placate me without changing anything. I prepared myself, printing out my account statements and gathering every document I could think of. My driver's license, my lease agreement, even my old university transcripts. If they wanted proof of who I was, I'd give it to them. When I walked into the bank, the lobby felt different, like the air carried a new kind of weight. Linda met me at the entrance, her smile tight but polite. She led me back to her office, where another woman sat, introduced as Susan Hayes, a regional supervisor from the bank's corporate office. Susan was older, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Okoye," she said, gesturing to a chair. "We take complaints like yours very seriously." Her tone was neutral, but I sensed she wasn't here to dismiss me. That gave me a flicker of hope. I sat down and laid out my side again, careful to stick to the facts. I described Karen's comments about my name and accent, the extra demands for ID, the way she'd spoken loudly to humiliate me. I mentioned the other customers' reactions, how they'd watched without intervening. "I've been banking here for years," I said. "I've never been asked for extra verification before. I want to know why it happened this time." Susan nodded, jotting notes on a legal pad. Linda sat quietly, her hands folded, her expression unreadable. After I finished, Susan leaned forward. "Mr. Okoye, I've reviewed your account history and everything checks out. You've been a consistent customer with no issues." She paused, her eyes meeting mine. "I also spoke with other employees and reviewed similar complaints." My heart skipped. "Similar complaints?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Susan nodded. "You're not the first to report this kind of treatment. We've had concerns about this branch, specifically about certain staff members. She didn't name Karen, but I knew who she meant." What came next floored me. Susan pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. "We interviewed several employees after your complaint," she said. "One of them, Javier Lopez, was working the counter next to Ms. Mitchell that day. He corroborated your account. I remembered Javier, the young teller who'd given me that small nod as I left Linda's office. He said he overheard Miss Mitchell's comments and noticed she didn't ask other customers for the same documentation," Susan continued. "He also said this wasn't the first time he'd seen her treat certain clients differently." I felt a rush of relief, but also a pang of anger. If Javier had seen this before, how many others had gone through it? How many had walked away, too embarrassed or exhausted to fight? "There are others?" I asked, my voice quieter now. Susan sighed, her professionalism slipping for a moment. "Yes, we've had complaints about dismissive behavior, particularly toward customers with non-English names or accents. Your case brought it to a head." She looked at me, her expression softening. "I'm sorry you had to experience that." Linda shifted in her seat, her discomfort obvious. "We're addressing it," she said quickly, like she needed to prove she was in control. But Susan's presence told me this was bigger than Linda's branch. I leaned forward, my hands steady on the armrests. "What does addressing it mean?" I asked. "Because I don't want an apology. I want to know this won't happen again. Not to me, not to anyone." My voice was calm, but the weight of it filled the room. Susan nodded, like she respected the question. "We're conducting a full investigation," she said. "We've also pulled records of other complaints, and we're cross-referencing them with employee conduct. Miss Mitchell has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome." My chest tightened. Not with satisfaction, but with the realization that this was real. My complaint had forced them to act. Susan went on. "We've also reached out to other customers who filed similar complaints. 2 agreed to provide statements. Their experiences match yours." I thought of those other customers, people like me who'd probably left the bank feeling small, their dignity chipped away. "Who are they?" I asked, not expecting an answer. Susan shook her head. "I can't share their names, but their statements are part of the investigation." "You've given them a voice, Mr. Okoye." Her words hit me hard. I hadn't set out to be anyone's voice. I just wanted to deposit my money. But now I was part of something bigger. Susan then asked about me, my background. I told her about my degree in finance, my years in Lagos as a manager, my struggle to find work in Chicago that matched my skills. I didn't hold back. I told her about the warehouse job, the late-night studying, the constant rejections because of my accent or my name. Linda's eyes widened slightly, like she hadn't expected me to be more than a number in her system. Susan listened intently, her pen still. "You've accomplished a lot," she said when I finished. "This bank should be serving people like you, not pushing them away." For the first time, I felt seen, not as a problem, but as a person. But I wasn't done. "This isn't just about one employee," I said. "It's about a system that lets this happen. If Javier saw it, if others complained, why wasn't it stopped before?" Susan didn't flinch. "You're right," she said. "That's why we're reviewing our training and policies. Your complaint exposed a gap, and we're addressing it." Linda nodded, but I could tell she was uneasy. This was her branch, her oversight. As I left the office, Javier was at his station, helping a customer. He caught my eye and gave another small nod, this one carrying more weight. I nodded back, a silent thank you. Outside, the Chicago wind hit me, but it didn't feel as cold. I'd walked into that bank a week ago expecting a simple transaction and left humiliated. Now, I'd forced them to confront their own failures. The problem wasn't me. It was a system that let people like Karen wield their biases unchecked. And, for the first time, I felt like I'd cracked that system open, just a little. But I knew this wasn't the end. There was more to do, and I was ready. The call came 10 days after my meeting with Susan Hayes. I was at the warehouse finishing a shift when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. It was Susan, her voice calm but direct. "Mr. Okoye, I wanted to update you on the investigation," she said. "We've completed our review, and I'd like to discuss the outcome in person. Can you come to the branch tomorrow?" I agreed, though a part of me braced for disappointment. I'd heard promises before, vague assurances that fizzled into nothing. But something in Susan's tone told me this was different. I told Amara when I got home, and she squeezed my hand. "You've already made them listen," she said. "That's more than most get." The next morning, I walked into the First National Bank on Clark Street, the same polished lobby where I'd been humiliated weeks earlier. The air felt less oppressive now, though I still scanned the counters for Karen's face. She wasn't there. Linda Carter met me at the entrance, her smile more genuine than before, though still tinged with caution. She led me to her office where Susan was waiting, a folder open on the desk. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Okoye," Susan said, standing to shake my hand. Her grip was firm, her expression serious but not dismissive. I sat down, my hand steady, ready for whatever came next. Susan didn't waste time. "Our investigation confirmed multiple instances of unprofessional conduct by Ms. Mitchell," she said, her voice steady. "She violated our customer service policies, and her actions were inconsistent with our standards of fairness. She's been terminated, effective immediately." The words hit me like a gust of wind, sharp, unexpected. I'd hoped for some kind of accountability, but hearing it confirmed felt heavier than I'd imagined. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "What about the other complaints?" I asked. "The ones you said matched mine." Susan glanced at Linda, who shifted in her seat. "We've reviewed those cases as well," Susan said. 3 other customers provided statements, and their experiences aligned with yours. Unnecessary scrutiny, comments about names or accents, delays in service. We've also spoken with employees, including Mr. Lopez, who confirmed a pattern of selective treatment. She paused, her eyes meeting mine. "You were right to call this a systemic issue. We're taking steps to address it." Linda nodded, her hands clasped tightly. "We're committed to making this right," she added, though her voice lacked Susan's conviction. I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees. "What steps?" I asked. I wasn't interested in apologies or firings alone. I wanted to know if this would actually change anything. Susan opened the folder and slid a document across the desk. "We're implementing mandatory training for all staff on cultural sensitivity and bias," she said. "It starts next month and will be ongoing. We're also revising our customer verification policies to ensure they're applied consistently, with clear guidelines to prevent discretion from being misused." She pointed to a section of the document. "And we're creating a reporting system for customers to flag issues directly to our regional office, bypassing branch management." I read the document, my eyes scanning the bullet points. It wasn't perfect. Training and policies didn't guarantee change, but it was more than I'd expected. "This applies to all branches?" I asked. Susan nodded. "It's rolling out across the region, starting here. Your complaint was a wake-up call, Mr. Okoye. We can't have customers feeling like they don't belong." Her words were sincere, but I couldn't shake the thought of how many others had felt that way before me, without anyone listening. Linda cleared her throat, her voice softer now. "On behalf of the branch, I want to apologize," she said. "What happened to you was unacceptable, and I take responsibility for not catching it sooner." I studied her face, searching for the rehearsed tone I'd heard before, but it wasn't there. She looked tired, maybe even a little ashamed. I nodded, not because I fully forgave her, but because I appreciated the effort. "Thank you," I said, "but this isn't just about me. I want to know it won't happen to someone else." Susan leaned forward, her hands folded. "We're also reaching out to the other complainants," she said. "We're offering apologies and, where appropriate, compensation for their experiences. We'd like to do the same for you." She slid another form across the desk, a settlement offer, a small sum to cover inconvenience. I pushed it back. "I don't want money," I said. "I want accountability. I want to know this bank will treat everyone the same, no matter what they sound like or where they're from." Susan nodded, a flicker of respect in her eyes. "That's our goal," she said, "and we'll follow up with you to ensure we're meeting it." As I left the office, I felt a weight lift, but not completely. Karen was gone, policies were changing, but the system that had let her thrive for so long wasn't fixed overnight. Still, I'd done something. My voice had forced a crack in that system. Outside, I saw Javier at his station, helping a customer with a warm smile. He caught my eye and gave a small wave, different from his earlier nods. It felt like solidarity, like he'd been rooting for this outcome too. I waved back, a quiet acknowledgement of the role he'd played. When I got home, Amara was waiting, her eyes searching mine for answers. I told her everything, the termination, the training, the new policies. She listened, her face softening with pride. "You didn't just fight for yourself," she said. "You fought for all of us." Her words sank in, and for the first time in weeks, I felt whole. Not triumphant, not vindicated, but whole. I'd walked into that bank expecting a simple deposit and left with my dignity questioned. Now I'd reclaimed it, not just for me, but for anyone who'd ever felt like they didn't belong. That night, I lay awake, thinking about what it all meant. The bank's changes were a start, but they wouldn't erase the years of slights I'd endured, the times I'd stayed silent. They wouldn't undo the moments others had faced, in banks or stores or offices, where their worth was measured by their accent or their name. But my complaint had done something. It had forced a reckoning, however small. I'd shown my kids, without saying a word, that their father could stand up and be heard, and I knew I wasn't done. This wasn't just about one bank or one employee. It was about a world that needed to change, one voice at a time. The weeks after the bank incident felt like stepping into a new version of my life, one I hadn't realized I'd been building toward. I walked taller, spoke clearer, even at the warehouse where the hum of forklifts and the chatter of coworkers had once drowned out my thoughts. The victory wasn't perfect. Systems don't change overnight, and I wasn't naive enough to think one complaint had fixed everything. But something had shifted inside me. I'd faced a moment that could have broken me and came out stronger, not just for myself, but for Amara, our kids, and others who'd felt the same sting of being dismissed. At home, I started talking more openly with Amara about what had happened. She'd always known the small slights I'd faced, the mispronounced names, the skeptical glances, but I'd kept most of it buried, not wanting to burden her. Now I let it out. "I used to think staying quiet was strength," I told her one night sitting at our kitchen table, "but it was just hiding." She nodded, her eyes soft but fierce. "You didn't hide this time," she said, "and you showed the kids what it means to stand up." That hit me hard. My son, Toby, had started asking why I'd been so serious lately. I hadn't told him the full story yet, but I knew I would. He needed to know his father wasn't invisible. The bank followed through on their promises, at least partially. A month later, Susan Hayes sent me a letter detailing the new training program and the updated verification policies. She included a contact number for the regional office's new reporting system, encouraging me to reach out if I saw or heard anything else. I tucked the letter away, not because I trusted it completely, but because it was proof my voice had mattered. I called Javier, the teller who'd backed me up, to thank him. "You didn't have to speak up," I told him over coffee at a diner near the bank. He shrugged, his smile easy but genuine. "I've seen too many people treated like that," he said. "Someone had to say something." His words stuck with me. Someone had to say something. Why not me? That question led me to a community center in my neighborhood, a place I'd passed 100 times but never entered. They ran programs for immigrants, resume workshops, language classes, legal advice. I started volunteering on weekends, helping people like me navigate the systems that had tripped me up. I met a woman from Ghana who'd been denied a loan because her accent made the banker uncomfortable. I met a man from Mexico who'd been laughed at for his name during a job interview. Their stories were different, but the feeling was the same: humiliation, dressed up as policy or misunderstanding. I listened, shared my own experience, and helped them draft complaints or prepare for interviews. It wasn't much, but it felt like paying forward the strength I'd found. I also started speaking up at work. When a coworker mimicked my accent during a break, I didn't laugh it off. "My name's Daniel," I said, looking him in the eye. "You don't need to make a joke out of it." He mumbled an apology, and the others went quiet. It wasn't confrontational, but it was clear. I wasn't shrinking anymore. Slowly, I noticed changes. People started pronouncing my name right, or at least trying. They asked about my background with curiosity instead of suspicion. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One evening, I sat down with Toby and his sister Kemi to talk about what had happened. I kept it simple, explaining how I'd been treated unfairly because of how I spoke and where I was from. "It's not right," I told them, "but you can't let it silence you. You speak up, even when it's hard." Toby nodded, his eyes serious for an 8-year-old. Kemi, quieter, hugged me afterward. I realized then that this wasn't just about me or the bank. It was about showing them they could face a world that might try to make them feel small. I kept in touch with the community center, eventually joining a local advocacy group focused on immigrant rights. We organized workshops, shared resources, and pushed for fair treatment in places like banks, schools, and workplaces. I wasn't leading the charge. I was just one voice among many, but it felt right. Every time I helped someone navigate a system that had tried to exclude them, I felt a piece of my old self return, the Daniel from Lagos who'd believed he could change things. Looking back, I don't see the bank incident as a triumph. It was a fight, one I hadn't chosen but couldn't avoid. I'd walked in expecting a simple deposit and walked out with my dignity questioned. But I'd also walked out with a decision: to speak, to act, to refuse to be invisible. That choice didn't erase the years of slights or the ones that might still come, but it gave me something better, a sense of who I was, not just in my own eyes, but in the world's. And if I could help one person, one mother, one worker, one kid, feel that same strength, it was worth it, because every voice matters, and every voice can change something.